Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Mark Rosen, and I'm the lead of the Commissioner's Office Policy Team. And Cindy, Summer, and Nick and myself are thrilled to have this opportunity today to share with you a high-level overview of the recently concluded 2026 state legislative session, with a focus on how the outcomes of the session will impact Boulder County. The policy team serves as the county lobbyists, collaborating with each of you while working under the commissioner's direction to advance the county's state and federal policy goals. We're also thrilled that later in the session this afternoon, Representative Kyle Brown of Louisville is going to join us for a few minutes. He's going to provide insights about the session and speak to the importance of the county's engagement with the legislative process. So we're looking forward to seeing Representative Brown. Policy team members will share thoughts on why the county engages with the state legislature. We'll discuss key themes and bills from the 2026 session and detail some achievements from the session that advance the county's legislative principles and priorities. We'll also have time for questions and answers, and we look forward to that. And we even have a quiz for you, so we're hoping that this will be a fun hour for you as well. And again, thank you all for joining us, and I'll hand the presentation over to the next team member.
I just want to make sure that our slides are showing.
Yeah, they will. I just want to make sure you can see Mark as he was talking.
Okay. Thank you. So if we go to slide 3. All right, yeah, that slide, thank you. So we wanted to explain a little bit about why the county engages at the Colorado legislature. And there's a multitude of reasons for why we engage. And this slide just shows a few of the reasons. So we engage because the state legislature often gets into issue areas that have a nexus with the county's mission, values, and strategic priorities. And as probably many of you know from your various departments, there's often impacts to county operations and services and revenue because of state legislation. So some other key reasons that we get involved are compliance requirements on the county, and those often change with every legislative session. And then we also get involved to help shape policy around community and environmental impacts to the county and to our residents. And then we have a quote from Commissioner Claire Levy on this slide to share with you, and that's from her perspective explaining why the county engages with the legislature. So next slide. So just this is a quick view of by the numbers for the 2026 legislative session. It was a busy session, but it was not quite as busy as usual because of the state's budget situation. So there are a lot of bills that maybe would have been introduced just weren't even introduced if they were going to require extra money from the state, because that money just was not there. But we did see 626 bills introduced during the session. 180 of those bills failed to pass, and the county commissioners took positions on 162 of the bills. And so we did have a pretty successful race. We had supported 91 bills, and of those bills had an 81% passage rate. And then we opposed 17 bills, and we were almost 100% successful at that because 16 of those failed. And then we worked on amendments for 48 bills. And all 48 of those bills, we either got all of the amendments that we were working on or at least part of the amendments that we were hoping to get. And then we had a lot of great engagement from the county staff. And so we had over 50 staff engaged on specific bills with us and with the commissioners. And then we did have commissioner or staff testimony on 21 bills. And this is a picture of Commissioner Stolzman testifying during one of the committee hearings on a bill. So we're definitely thankful for all of the staff's thoughtful engagement during this session. So with that, I will turn it over to Summer. Next slide.
Yeah, so next slide, we just wanted to hear a little bit from you before we dive deeper into the presentation, a little bit about your experience. And so in the room, if you want to take out your phone and scan this code, it will take you to a little Mentimeter poll. If you're online, you can do the same thing. You can scan the code, or you can go to menti.com. But the easiest thing I would say is to kind of scan the code. And we'll give you a little bit of time to do that, and then we'll switch over to look at the results and see kind of what the experience is in the room and online with the state legislature. For folks in the room, were you able to get in?
My eyes are frozen.
Oh, no. Anyone else not able to get in? The one in the room who couldn't. I wonder if the other way to get in is through a link. But what we could do is if you go to menti.com, there's also a number we can type in when we go to the web page people can go to. So if the folks in the room are in, I think if we switch to the web page, we'll start to see some results. Can the folks see that?
Summer,
Yes.
I'm getting a message that the folks online are not able to hear us.
Oh, no.
It's rendering
Okay. Is it the volume of which we're speaking? Do we need to speak louder, or you have no sound?
I'm seeing messages saying.
We can
people
hear,
said
they
they
can
Now
hear.
we're good.
Okay, okay.
Okay.
I wonder if when we switch screens, if it cuts out for folks, but we'll speak louder as well. So it looks like if folks can,
Oh, Colin, but there's a message to go back to the Menti, so.
okay, if you are trying to get to here, we'll go back to the Menti, if you're still trying to scan that code.
Or they can look in Q&A for the
The
link.
Q&A will also have the link if you're online.
Sounds like they just missed the first 5 minutes.
Oh, no.
Really?
Really?
Oh,
Whatever
no.
Mark said was so good.
Darn it. We
It's
even
about
tested
3
audio
minutes
with-
halfway through that we can miss. through.
We did a pre-test of the audio. I'm so sorry for those of you online, and I'm hoping the recording picked up what we did say in the beginning. But please, yeah, keep messaging us if anything else pops up in terms of tech issues. I think we can go ahead and look at the results and just see what kind of, whole range. Looks like a lot of folks have some experience tracking legislation during the session. One person has a policy team member, Heidi. A policy member in their
More
favorites
than one.
contacts, yeah. And so we feel that the presentation today will kind of have a little bit for everyone, and we're also available to provide departmental level presentations if you're interested. We will also provide each department with a report. So just reach out to us after this if you'd like to learn more. We'll just kind of do the basics in an overview, but we're happy to go in deeper with anyone. So thank you. I think with that, we can go to the next slide. So the other thing that we really wanted to talk about before we dive into our priorities were some of the key themes this year, because the key themes impact almost everything else we try to do in the building. And as Cindy mentioned, the state budget was definitely a key theme this year. Colorado spends about $40 billion a year. Each year, the general fund is a big chunk of that. And what we saw was really decreased revenue this year, and high costs for program expenditures, unfortunately. And so almost everything in the building was impacted by the budget. This year there was a lot of talk about a $1.5 billion shortfall. You may have heard that just through the news. It was a little bit more complex than that. What we did see was that the legislature was able to address the shortfall, and pass a balanced budget, which is part of a requirement of the state legislature to do every year. But unfortunately, they had to cut key services. So they cut things like human services, multimodal transportation, Medicaid. They adjusted the revenue forecast, so went with a more optimistic revenue forecast. They lowered the state reserve requirement, and they also redirected funding from different cash funds into the general fund. So this was the third of really tight budget years. They called it kind of a shell game, and each year it's getting tougher and tougher for them to balance the budget. Some of the drivers of those budget issues were things like the passage of HR 1, so federal legislation, I'll talk a little bit more about this, but our tax code in Colorado is tied to the federal tax code. So when they make tax cuts to corporations and to wealthy individuals, that also happened in Colorado. We also saw that in previous years, we talk about this a lot, they passed legislation without adequate resources. And so those sorts of issues start to build up over time. And then we saw rising costs in things like Medicaid and criminal justice. Another big theme of the year was the regulation of technology. So I don't know if any folks heard about the artificial intelligence conversation or the flock conversation. So there's quite a bit happening in the building as it related to tech and whether or not we can regulate that at the state level. We did see the passage of Senate Bill 189, which was a compromise AI regulation bill that replaced a previously more stringent AI regulation bill that was passed in 2024. We also saw another high-profile bill, Senate Bill 70, which was from Senator Motley, that would have regulated flock and other surveillance type technology. Boulder County did support that bill, get some amendments that failed this year. There was a couple of bills on data centers, unfortunately, we're not able to pass. And then we saw a couple of successes. One was Senate Bill 11, which requires social media companies to respond to warrants from law enforcement when there's been criminal activity tied to their platform. Currently, law enforcement has a hard time getting information tied to, even when they have a judicial warrant for a response. So that passed. And then also there were some AI regulation bills as it relates to psychotherapy. And then finally, the other big theme was really the federal policy impacts to the state legislature. So I already mentioned some of the budget issues from the passage of HR 1, but HR 1 also changed the way we administer Medicaid and SNAP. Obviously, that's a big part of what Human Services does in Boulder County. And so there was legislation to change the way we administrate those services. And so Human Services staff were very engaged this session on House Bill 1429. And then finally, we've been seeing an erosion of civil rights protections at the federal level. And so there has been some attempt at the local or state level to really strengthen some of those protections for people with disabilities, people who are LGBTQ, and people who are immigrants, which we'll talk about a little bit more. So with that, I'll pass it over to Nick.
Can I ask a question?
I think we're gonna try to hold.
Yeah.
Yeah, if that's okay. To the end.
Hey, great, thank you. So we'll talk a little bit about how we set our priorities each year and how that helps us approach each legislative session. So if you've seen on our BCNet webpage, we have this document and a new one before every legislative session gets posted. But this is cover page for 2026 state legislative and budget priorities. And so of course, our legislature convenes from January through May of every year. And in advance of that, our team works with US staff, meeting with different teams, meeting with the commissioners, meeting with our legislators and many of the partners in the community to address the most pressing policy issues across the county that we should advocate for. And we start this process as early as June. So, we're in this process of we're finalizing the report for this last session and already planning for the next one. So throughout the summer and fall, our team will hold meetings, research ideas brought forward by staff, commissioners, and constituents, and highlight bills that have not been successful in past legislative sessions to see if it could be a priority for the next session. We rely heavily on your expertise in connection with clients and community members to identify where current law is not working or needs to be improved. The BOCC then makes the final selection of the county's state legislative and budget priorities. Of course, Boulder County will also take positions on other bills outside of what's included in our priorities and principles, but this lets us know where to spend the majority of our time advocating at the legislature. And also another benefit to establishing the priorities is that our county and team are well poised to understand the positions that our commissioners want to take. And also, our team tracks all the legislation that is introduced during the session and try to determine if it will have an impact on the county and if it falls within our legislative and budget priorities and principles. So in the following slides, we're going to and use the framework of the legislative principles to highlight some of the bills of note this session. So starting with the legislative principle of racial equity, and I'll read what that principle says. Boulder County is committed to creating and adopting fully inclusive, anti-racist, and culturally responsive policies. We have a responsibility to interrupt institutional racism, which manifests through racist policy, practices, and behaviors. We are dedicated to eliminating systemic discrimination against people in all protected classes. We address racism at its root and review all state legislation through a lens of racial equity and strive to solicit the voices and perspectives of those historically excluded from the legislative process. So we can see from under this principle, there's example of 3 bills that we took positions on this session, and all 3 of these bills passed. I'll highlight the first one, HB 1143. It's got a long title. It's Non-Employment Educational Opportunities Background Check Information. So what this means is, currently, many institutions of higher education or healthcare facilities or nonprofit organizations have requirements, maybe have their own internal policy that requires a social security number when they conduct a background check for somebody who wants to possibly do an internship or some sort of direct non-employment experience with that institution. And that internal policy then blocked many Coloradans from being able to participate in educational programs like clinical experience or health careers or other volunteer roles. So what this bill does is that it will prohibit an entity from requiring an individual to provide a social security number for a background check for a non-employment-based educational opportunity. The entity can still ensure safety by utilizing either an ITIN, so an individual taxpayer identification number, or a fingerprint-based background check. And that's what the state of Colorado uses when they do their background checks, the fingerprint-based background check. Okay, and yeah, similar to the protections for LGBT community, where that's HB 1322, and we also saw bill related to allowing members of the indigenous community to receive compensation for healing ceremonies and practices. Okay, we can move to the next slide, please. Okay, now I'll speak quickly to the democracy principle. So many, if not all, of the basic functions of Boulder County's government rely upon the authority granted the county under the constitutions of the United States and Colorado and federal and state law. Basic human rights, equal protection under the law, and equality of life in Boulder County are dependent upon a fully functioning United States democracy. Boulder County supports policy that maintains and strengthens the democratic form of government of the U.S. and Colorado and opposes overcriminalization and policy that weakens human rights and democratic tenets in government. So these are 3 examples of some of the bills that fall under this principle. The top 2 are related to immigration-related legislation. I'll speak more to, so Senate Bill 005. We're excited about this bill. This bill is going to allow people who are injured during civil immigration enforcement to be able to bring lawsuit against that civil immigration law enforcement officer. And that was Commissioner Stolzman, the picture of her in the previous slide. That was her testimony for Senate Bill 005. Unfortunately, that bill just last night was vetoed by the governor. So yeah, unfortunately, we'll have to see and hopefully see another iteration of a bill like this to help protect our rights as individuals against excessive force or abuse from federal agents. To speak about a bill that did pass, 1276. So this bill was brought forward by CIRC, the Colorado Immigrant Rights Coalition, and this bill, after having to make some changes, of course, most bills go through many amendments. What is remaining in the bill is making sure that detention facilities that hold immigrants, that they will be inspected on a regular basis by either county or state health departments, require medical and mental health professional at all times in those facilities. And also make some changes related to training for law enforcement, and the Attorney General's office will also have to have a model policy related to protecting personally identified information. Okay, sorry. That was a lot. I'm gonna pass it to Cindy.
Cindy.
Next slide, please. So the county also has a legislative principle for climate action and environmental justice. So that principle is that Boulder County is dedicated to protecting and enhancing our environment for generations to come. We advance strategies that promote sustainability, address the climate crisis, protect our open lands, and improve air quality. We make decisions and promote policies that address the inequitable impacts of the climate crisis and pollution. So the slides on this bill, I thought it was important to provide a bit of a mix. And one reason for that is that this session and a little bit last year too were not so great, in my view at least, with bills that address this legislative principle. And that's partially due to the state budget. So there's not money, unfortunately, to do a lot of like what, some are seeing as like the extra things, which is, to try to defend against the climate crisis and improve environmental justice. And so we did have some successful legislation, the HB 1007, that was run by one of our own representatives, Representative Smith, from our Boulder County delegation. This legislation is exciting because it allows homeowners to, or not even home, just anyone to use a plug-in solar device in their home. And so sometimes people call this balcony solar. They have in Germany. I was in Germany a couple of years ago, and our relatives had balcony solar and didn't even realize that those units aren't even really available for sale in the U.S. yet. Utah actually was the first state to pass a law a couple of years ago allowing this, and now Colorado has this. And so in the future, hopefully in the very near future, people will be able to go to the hardware store and purchase some kind of little plug-in solar device that you can put on in your backyard or your balcony, and that helps. That helps with accessibility for people who don't have access or the means to have rooftop solar. So that was an exciting bill. It's all it's every little thing that helps with the climate crisis. A big bill this session was HB 1326. That was the Sunset Public Utilities Commission, or PUC bill. This is something that happens routinely where the PUC has to be re-upped. Not all the state commissions are like that. And so that bill goes through this process of there's a review from the department, and then a lot of the departmental recommendations get put into the bill, but then a lot of stakeholders like us try to get involved and get extra, pieces added to the bill to help with our, help advance our goals. And so there were several wins with equity impact proceedings being included in the bill, and increased intervener opportunities when entities want to intervene at the PUC. We were specifically working on hoping to include health impacts assessments as a requirement, so for instance, if a big utility is going through a rulemaking process at the PUC, then they propose changes to their natural gas plant, then we wanted them to include health impacts, to look at negative or positive impacts of, if they're increasing or decreasing emissions. That wasn't included, and we were also working with Denver and some other local governments to try to increase our access to utility data. That would help with public service power shutoffs and a lot of things, but we weren't successful there, but we're committed to trying again next year. And then we have a few failed pieces here. We tried this financing utility on bill repayment program. last session and this session, and it failed mostly because of the use of the unclaimed property trust funds. It was like the funding mechanism that kind of made that fail, so it was a little disappointing. And then we did see data centers were mentioned. There were tax incentives for data centers, and then there was a bill for environmental community protections. Those both failed. We do expect to see that coming back next year. So, and then with that, I'll turn it to Mark. So we can move on to the next slide. Thank you.
Thank you, Cindy. Certainly a budgetary fiscal theme to most everything that's happened down at the legislature. As Summer, Cindy, and Nick have noted. The fourth legislative principle that the commissioners have adopted is the financial and organizational stewardship legislative principle. That principle focuses on effective use of taxpayer funds and collaboration with state and other partners on fiscal decisions that will impact Boulder County. We have lots of examples of bills that intersected with the county in respect to this principle. Summer had mentioned cost shifting, the state passing legislation or passing requirements and then sending those down to local governments, but not providing any funding to actually implement and do that work. So we were constantly keeping our eyes peeled for those kinds of bills and other efforts. I just wanted to mention one of the bills here, specifically House Bill 1001 there at the top. This bill is a good example of legislation that would impact the financial and organizational stewardship principle and how the county does its work. It proposed to create a by right land use to develop multifamily housing on any 5-acre property connected to domestic water and sewer services. So any 5-acre property, both in the unincorporated and incorporated parts of the county. Commissioner Levy cited this bill as a memorable piece of legislation that she engaged in over the session, stating, "I was heavily engaged in HB 261001, also known as the Home Act. This legislation would have allowed housing developments on certain properties to proceed without any local review, even if the development was not consistent with our land use code and with the Boulder County Comprehensive Plan." So again, it kind of impacts that nexus between state and local control. We worked heavily on this bill. As Commissioner Levy notes, we helped secure a number of amendments and one important one, which ensures that construction of housing, we would not see construction of housing in areas of unincorporated counties that are far flung and disconnected from infrastructure and services, and helping ensure that any construction or new development that comes out of the bill is connected either in the municipalities or close by to the municipalities, so that the residents of this new housing will have good access to everyday needs like transit, schools, and employment. There were dozens, as I mentioned, dozens of other bills that intersected with this priority, and we're going to include most, not all of those, in our legislative session final report that we will be completing later this month. Just wanted to mention that so you have something to look forward to if you want to read more about what we did in respect to this principle. Okay, next slide.
So this is where we wanted to make it a little bit more dynamic. We were just talking about a few of the highlights of the session. As everyone's mentioned, there were hundreds of other bills, more than 100 other bills that we were engaged in. And looking around the room, we were working with a lot of you on some of those bills in really different ways. So we wanted to open the floor to questions or comments, to hear from you. What were some of the memorable highlights, or what are some questions you have about the process or the session? And just both online, you should be able to type questions into the Q&A box, and here in the room. I know Heidi, you had a question. So
I did,
Heidi,
I just wrote it down so I didn't forget.
Nice, thank you.
So, with the delays on the federal side, we're now starting to see those grant applications come out. And buried deep in most of those federal grant applications is really interesting language. How does that intersect with like the county's stance? Because, we need the federal dollars for a lot of our programs, but it also is very opposite of our values and our beliefs. And so are we just not applying for federal grants anymore? Chris, I see.
This was actually a big conversation after the election, and also all throughout 2025. So there was a project to look at our federal policy stance. And so it's a little bit separate than the state legislative process, but it really kind of it's relying on our contracts approval process to have the attorneys review any contract and really to involve the attorneys early on before you apply for anything at this point, where the Commissioner's Office and the Office of Financial Management are revamping the grants process, and they want you to engage the attorney's office as soon as possible. And for those particular reasons, sometimes there can be something really buried in the contract or buried in the notice of financial opportunity or whatever the RFP, request for proposal, looks like. So they really want to partner with you, because sometimes what may look like challenging language is not necessarily so in implementation. And I think that's really more of a legal question than a policy question. I think the way that we intersect with that is just our engagement on policy overall. Like when you see something come out where there's a comment period, our team can help you in drafting comment or in engaging with our Congress people on specific pieces of legislation or rulemaking. But then once it comes to implementation, that really is the county attorney's office and OFM. That's helpful. But yes, great question, because that's definitely coming up, I think, in a lot of different departments right now. I don't know, are there any questions online?
Not yet.
Other questions in the room or comments, like any highlights for you? A lot of you in the room are engaged in the session, things that you noticed this year.
I know you've already heard this from the housing department, but thank you. Like this year was, like all the other years, feast, not famine on the housing front. And, you know, the Prop 123 fix, that was a big lift, and just thank you.
I appreciate that. Yeah, it was fun to work with your team. Yeah, very good.
On that note, I can just add a little bit around. So we were looking through the lens, and this is where Summer spent a lot of her time around potential impacts to the housing authority, right? So Prop 123 is an example. But 1001 is another example of the governor and the General Assembly's interest in trying to do more to increase the supply of housing in Colorado, sort of writ large, beyond just the housing, what the housing authorities do, and creates lots of tension between what is traditionally the bailiwick, so to speak, of local government land use versus the state stepping in and saying, just like with 1001, oh, you have to do this now. Right? We're going to say we need housing, and we believe you all are actually part of the problem, you all being local governments. And we're going to tell you how we're going to, what you need to do in this space. So created a lot of the land use dynamic, and the land use conversation over the last couple of years has created a lot of tension in the building. And part of our job was really to try to take the best of that, things that could be really helpful, but also make sure that our staff and our community has ability to shape what that housing ultimately looks like and where it goes in the county. So housing was a really dynamic space, just as you noted, and in lots of different ways, both direct impacts to housing authority, but indirect impacts to local governments.
I want to echo the thanks too from Community Justice Services for the work you guys do. It feels like every year the process gets more refined and we're getting more and more nimble in terms of the two-way communication that happens. A question I have, I've heard rumblings about a special session. Have you guys heard anything about that? And what would be the main driver to have a special session this time around?
Yeah, we've heard the same rumblings, but they've
Yeah.
diminished a little bit
Right.
recently. And I think we can probably talk a little bit about the transportation ballot measure, but also there was discussion of the state budget potentially needing a rework. Because as I think I mentioned that they chose, the Joint Budget Committee chose the more optimistic revenue forecast. And they did the shell game to try to make the budget work. So they may have to return to do some fixes. And then data centers didn't pass, neither than one with environmental protection or the industry friendly one. So that was a question where they would come back to do that. And then there's some ballot measures. I don't know if Cindy wants to talk about that.
Oh, yeah.
And then,
But, yeah, I guess on data centers, it's, well, you know, the latest, I mean, it seems like it changes every day, like there's gonna be a special session and then the next day there's not going to be. But, with data centers, those bills didn't pass, but there isn't the thought is that there's not gonna be a special session just because of data centers, that would be handled next session, unless there's a special session, and then data centers get added to it, so. That's
Still
the
TBD.
latest that we've heard.
We've heard if
But-
it happens, it would be in August, most likely. But
Yeah.
we're gonna cross our fingers for no.
Yeah, yeah.
It's,
Yeah.
although August is the best time of the year to be in the
Because
capital.
there's no air conditioning.
But remember that, Governor Polis has kind of had a habit of calling special sessions fairly regularly. He will not be around in 2027, so if not, some of their priorities, his priorities didn't get accomplished in 2026, this is the last chance to try to get them done, so that could come into play as well, and then some of these other issues that are floating around that need some more time to percolate, whether or not they rise to the level of needing a special session. Special sessions have to be pretty narrowly constrained, and it won't surprise you to hear this, that all of the bills and all of the outcomes are pretty much worked out in advance before the special session is even called. So whether there's gonna be unanimity or support amongst the caucuses, the Democratic caucus in the House and the Senate and the governor around some things, data centers or wherever, will determine whether or not there's a special session. So we'll see. Yeah, we'll see.
Yeah.
Oh, too many questions.
And then Tessa.
Yeah.
Does the state, release information on like the dollar figure and cost to run a special session?
Oh, that's such a great question. There was discussion of that. But I think we'll have to follow up with you what the actual cost was, because I remember them having the conversation of the staff cost, the staff are in the building,
Yeah.
but what it costs to bring everybody back for that time period. And that's why they generally tend to run them as short as possible. The shortest they can do it is 3 days, but generally they're usually 5. Sometimes they're 5 days, but they are very quick. And to Mark's point, the bills are kind of already baked when they come in. So we always, you know, everyone tries to get some of their amendments in.
I just want to echo another big thanks from public health for all of your support, on so many things, especially the Cottage Foods Act, mitigating some of what was initially in that bill. But I'm curious, as you were talking about new administration coming in and wondering what that means, and if you do any kind of engagement with gubernatorial candidates before the election, and just curious about how, if you have any predictions of from past new administrations. I know it's been 8 years, but then how long does it take as like maybe new directors are put into agencies and things are shaking out? How does that, what implications does that have for a legislative session?
Mhm.
And that's a lot of questions.
It's a great
Great
question. I would say we don't tend to engage in any of the election process as county staff. So we don't tend to engage directly with those that are either in primaries or in the stages before the election. But as soon as there is the decision is when we do start to engage with whoever the new governor is. We tend to hear from the elected officials who are engaging and are allowed to engage in those processes more about the tone and tenor of what's happening, who is being considered for different department heads, state departments, and how that's playing out. So there's a little bit of kind of forecasting, I think, that happens in advance. And then I would say, from my personal opinion, this governor was maybe the most engaged in the legislative process that anyone can remember in history. He has a very strong lobbying staff. They're very effective in the building of lobbying, changing, killing, passing bills. And it was because he had been a congressperson, you know, he came into that position with a lot of expertise. And also, depending on who I think becomes the next governor, I don't know how they will approach that, but definitely Governor Polis had a very strong presence, I would say, in everything that, I don't know if others would agree.
Yeah.
An outsized presence, you might even say. I think my guess is the approach of the new governor, whichever of the whoever ends up winning the seat will be dramatically different than what we've seen in the last 8 years. And I think everybody in the building is going to be thankful for that, to be honest. And there's just going to be a very different approach just based on the candidates and the way they've done their work. I mean, if a former legislator does win and becomes governor, that might change things a little bit, but it should be a very different approach. I would say membership associations are a great way to engage with candidates before either even in primary season or before the general election. If membership associations should not be waiting to the day after election day to begin communicating with the candidates. They should be doing that now. As Summer noted, as staff, we're not doing that. If a candidate reaches out to us and says, hey, we want to talk with you about your priorities, then we don't say no, but then we also think about how to offer up that same opportunity to every candidate for that seat, just from a fairness perspective. It's not often that candidates reach out to us. They're too focused on campaigning and winning. But if a candidate ever reached out to us, we wouldn't, we'd be happy to engage, but we'd also offer up the same opportunity to the other candidates. But membership associations should be doing that kind of work once they have some priorities figured out, or just in general to get to know the candidates and be ready for when the time comes. And if that person wins, then you've set the table at least a little bit beforehand.
Do we have any questions online?
Notice a comment from Colin earlier about engaging the attorneys as soon as possible on grants, going back to Heidi's.
Next question.
Okay,
More of a comment.
okay. Great.
So we think Rep. Brown was gonna,
He's gonna make it.
okay, good.
12:50. Yeah.
12:50, so, all right. We need a few more questions. Chris, let's go. Let's go. Somebody else start thinking of another one.
I'm sure you'll love this. So as I mentioned, I'm very much focused on the budget and public health, and just wondering if there's any discussion on the revenue side of the budget, the structural side of the budget, the taxpayer bill of rights.
Yeah.
We know that, in essence, what's happening is there's structural changes happening at the federal level, unfunded mandates, shifting things to local, state and public health, or state and local entities with no money. And I feel like what I haven't heard is like, does anyone have a vision for shifting these systems? Shifting how government is funded, how schools are funded, how the main all the above. So
Yeah.
I'm just curious if anyone has talked about that. And I understand it's really challenging. It would have to maybe go to the ballot. I don't know if the legislature is like on any legislative basis for this.
That's a great question. I failed to mention that Colorado Fiscal Institute did bring forward a package of legislation this session to try to decouple Colorado's tax code from the federal tax code. Only 2 of those bills passed. One's been signed, one is we're still waiting to see if it's signed. But there are ballot measures, not that there was one measure that was referred specifically by the legislature as it relates to education funding. But similarly, there's a measure out for collection right now that would change some aspects of Tabor and that would allow a variable tax rate. So it would not increase taxes on people making less than $500,000 a year, but it would on those making over $500,000 a year. And it directs money to healthcare, childcare, education, some of the big dollar, things in the state budget. So it's a small tweak. They haven't gotten all their signatures yet, so that's not yet certified for the ballot. But there's definitely talk about that, and there were other discussions. It's kind of heightening, I feel like, the discussion around Tabor. Politically, it's still been really challenging, I think, for everyone to agree on the correct path.
Yeah, I would just add, there are lots of great ideas. There's no shortage of ideas on how to fix the problem. There may be different approaches and different preferences, but plenty of great ideas. What's lagging is the politics.
Yeah.
And it's not just the politics of the legislators, it's the politics of the voters, frankly.
Yeah.
And I can't even think of the last time Colorado voters turned down a reduction in the income tax rate, right? put something on the ballot to reduce the income tax rate or something, and it's like catching fish in a barrel, right? Even in Colorado, right? You ask people about Tabor and everybody like, hates what Tabor does, but, oh, here's an income tax reduction ballot measure. Oh, yeah, I'll vote for that. Right, so there's this sort of like, schizophrenia in the voters, like they're constantly saying on one hand, they don't want to pay taxes, but then we've got Tabor and this, the mess that creates. So things have to keep moving forward. I think Summer's right in that things are getting closer and closer, and the graduated income tax measure that'll be on the ballot in the fall will be a good test.
Yeah.
And then we'll see where the new leadership there'll be new leadership in the state house. There'll be new leadership in the governor's office. We'll see where those folks want to take that message over the next couple of years and see what can be done, what positive work can be done. But Tabor is the problem in lots and lots of ways. But while there's disagreement around some or support for removing some of the really bad pieces of Tabor, the Colorado voter seems to have gotten used to it and sort of says, yeah, I kind of like some of this too. So it's been a tough needle to thread.
Thank you.
Tessa?
I saw reporting on an organization called Advance Colorado, which is sort of like the Republicans' method because they haven't had a majority for so long that they are sort of doing this dark money thing, getting some like a think tank to put out maybe not totally true or evidence-based reports, and then getting so many messages out there that like if you were to Google safe neighborhoods, or if you were to Google a proposition that really is about one thing, it's like they've seeded the internet with some misinformation so that when the ballot measure comes up, people don't really know what they're voting for.
Yeah.
Is there any kind of strategy to combat that locally?
Not locally, but at the state level, there is a new website, what is Advanced Colorado.org, I think it is. And last year we say Michael Fields has more power than almost anyone in the state who runs Advanced Colorado. And they ran several ballot measures, some that really gutted the state budget even further in interesting ways that looked really good as you read the ballot language. Like, do you want to raise funding for, I think it was law enforcement, mental health, all these great things? Not saying there's no way we're raising the money, we're just gonna cut it out of everything else with, so do you want to raise these particular funds? Yes, but do you want to cut schools, healthcare, everything to do with, that's not in the ballot language. So that passed, and they have several bills running, several ballot measures coming this fall. And so I was talking recently to one of the no campaigns, just because we're doing an evaluation of each one, the commissioners will take positions on the ballot measures. And then after that, staff are not involved, just from a factual perspective, we can provide information. And she was saying that the opposition is now becoming more organized but it was almost kind of just repeatedly, like the special sessions that we had to go to around property tax reductions. That was Advanced Colorado. They've become very strategic
And
and
it's
very
not,
powerful.
and beyond budget, there's also the initiative for guaranteeing a right to natural gas. So, I mean, that's a very anti-climate, strategy there with the ballot measures. So.
Yeah, there's a concerted effort to use the initiative and referenda process initiatives primarily to influence what goes on in the Capitol. And we're going to pull a ballot title that's incredibly draconian, and we've got money and resources to get it on the ballot. And if you, the legislature, don't do something that we want you to do, or at least come in our direction in some way, we're going to run this ballot measure, which is far worse than what you would, we might agree to do with you here in the session during the legislative session. So it's a really cynical way to run the state, but they're leveraging all opportunities to advance their agenda, because just as you pointed out, they can't get it through the legislative process. They won't have majority, frankly, or leadership to do it. Well, Fred Brown is here. If he's not, Yes, I have one more question.
I'm curious, like, if a Republican
Yes.
is voted governor,
He's not showing.
how do you, and, you know, it's still a Democratic controlled chambers, like, what does that look like? Like vetoing more, or like, how would that influence the functioning?
Your question was if we have a Republican governor? Yeah, it's more challenging.
Yeah, it probably means, there's just going to have to be a lot more negotiation about what's acceptable. I don't, in other words, if you had if you had the minority party in the House and Senate was the executive, I don't think the legislature would send the same raft of bills to that governor and then just expect the governor to veto a lot of them. There may be some strategic ones that they would send because they want to get the governor on record, but there would be a lot of negotiation between the first floor and the second floor to prevent a lot of that from happening, would be my guess. You know, it's not a scenario that we're expecting to face anytime soon, at least not in 2026. It has been interesting to watch the Republican Party and the challenges they've gone through in the state as the state has transitioned over the last 20-some years. And it's sort of, I guess this would be my editorial comment, not a Boulder County staffer comment, but you look at the bench in the Republican Party in Colorado and it's very thin. Right? And I mean, that's just a reality. And I think that's a function of the fact that the state has shifted in a different direction over the last 20 years and they're dealing with the dynamic. You know, they tend to shoot themselves in the foot a lot. Political parties generally do that anyway, but it makes it tough for them. I would say that the Republican leadership, especially in the Senate, is very effective and the Senate is just a much more collegial and kind of roll up your sleeve, let's sort of get things done. Chamber, the House tends to be much more, you know, I think of Parliament, I think of the House. Senate leadership, minority leadership has been really great over the last several years, really effective in negotiating really excellent outcomes for.
You know, Mark, if you're gonna badmouth the House, you should at least wait until I'm out of the room. No, I'm just kidding.
In a bad way, it's all good, all good.
Thanks for joining us, Representative Brown. Sorry that was.
We were talking about Republicans, just to be clear.
Yeah, thanks for joining.
Sorry, Mark, to sneak up on you. Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think we were just happy to have you. We have, 10 more minutes in our presentation and we wanted to open the floor to you, like we said, just if you want to share a little bit about Representative Kyle Brown. He represents House District 12, parts of Louisville, Erie, Superior, Niwot. He's a great collaborator down the building. We love working with him. He's been chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, and now this last session was on the powerful Joint Budget Committee. So we're just glad to have him here, and we wanted to open the floor just to hear from you. What were some of the highlights of this session, some of the big impacts to our communities, and just maybe a little bit too about why it's important for the county to engage with the legislative process.
Yeah, thanks, Summer, and thanks, Mark. I really appreciate the invitation, and I will try not to talk too much. That's always hard for a politician, I guess. I always appreciate being able to work with Boulder County and Boulder County staff, not the least of which is because I live there, right? It's my county too. And also the whole staff at Boulder County is fantastic, and we really have a great partnership, I think. In terms of the session this year, the dominant theme of the session was this very challenging budget that we faced, and we did pass a balanced budget, but there were a lot of programs that got cut along the way. And that's really a challenging thing. It's challenging for the clients that Boulder County, the people, the families, the kids that Boulder County serves, right? Everything from foster parents or I should say, you know, adopted parents, to, you know, folks who receive Medicaid, and a whole lot of other things, in between. So I realize that we're not making your jobs at the county any easier, but it is, just a challenging environment. You know, the federal government has pulled back money from the states. We are dealing with the initial kind of implementation of HR1, trying to deal with that. And actually, a bill signing I was just at was for 1429, which was a bill that the Joint Budget Committee ran, to help more effectively kind of coordinate the administration of our services. And I know that Boulder County had a lot to do with where that bill ended up, and making it a much better piece of legislation than what we started with originally, and what some of the original proposals from the administration were. So I want to thank you all for that. You know, I think in terms of priorities of the county, you know, healthcare was something that I know I heard from you all about, and we worked really hard to try to protect the Omni Salute program and the subsidies that are on exchange and off exchange, to make sure that people can maybe have a chance of affording their health insurance. We're also working on the homeowners insurance problem, and a bill that we just got signed is another bill of mine, related to specifically to hail damage, and the impact that has on homeowners insurance rates, and premiums, and how they increase, because about 50 in Boulder County, like many counties, about 50% of your homeowner's premium comes from basically the claims that are related to hail. So we're trying to make a big dent in that. So I'd say that those are some of the themes were, you know, trying to hang on to what we have, you know, very difficult cuts, but then also trying to still solve problems, and put things in a better place, because we've got a lot of work still to do to make the state a more affordable place to live. So I don't know if I'm happy to take questions, or I know you guys are on a tight time frame, and I'm late because of events, so sorry about that.
Oh, no apologies needed. We were happy you could join, even, I know you had to run from a bill signing into your office, so thank you for making this work. I know it's like one more minute, so I think the only other thing was if you wanted to share maybe one of highlight, you've talked about a few, but if there's anything else you'd like to share, yeah.
I think that I'll just share that, you know, I mentioned how much I really appreciate being able to work with you all, and how great Boulder County is on so many different fronts. But I also just want to say that, like, we're in this together, and I'm going to need your help, with HR1 kicking in on the Medicaid side, with potential SNAP penalties coming towards the state. We're all going to have to pull together, state and counties, to come up with ways to minimize the damage from these terrible federal policies that are getting forced upon us. So I just really appreciate your continued partnership, and your commitment to serving the folks in our community, because that's what it's going to take. It's going to take some real creative thinking and the best efforts that we have to try to make the best out of the federal terribleness that's coming down. So.
Yeah, thank you. Yes, we'll definitely be there and working in partnership with you as we work through implementation, especially at the Joint Budget Committee.
Yeah.
And I know we're at time, and so I know folks have other things on their calendars, but just want to thank you again for taking the time today. And I think Mark was going to kind of wrap us up.
Yeah, thank you, Rep. Brown. Really appreciate your time. Best of luck in the summer, and please do reach out whenever we can help. And just want to say thanks to all of you for attending, either in person or virtually, and please do send us questions. We'll be reaching out to you shortly. We have a post-presentation survey. We also are happy to come to your departments and talk. We're going to do some open hours for the team throughout the summer, so we'll be communicating all that back to you shortly. And thank you again for your time and attention today. Have a good afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you.